the Software Process and Measurement Cast number 687. I'm Tom Quigley, your host. Today, continuous improvement through inspecting and adapting is a core tenet of an Agile mindset, which dovetails well with executives' needs to deliver the most value possible. Measurement is an important tool to help teams and organizations ask the right questions at the right time. Flow metrics, not burndowns and velocity, need to be a big part of any IT organization's approach to measurement. We also have a visit from Jon M Quigley, who brings his Alpha and Omega of Product Development column to the podcast. Jon discusses the complicated relationship between time, work entry, and promises. By the way, have you checked out the Open Transformation Playbooks Martin Foster discussed last week? If not, you're missing something important. Check it out. There's a link in the show notes. Check it out. The Open Transformation Playbooks is an initiative to build an open, remixable body of knowledge for agile organizational transformation. To deal with, are you ready to talk flow metrics? It's time for the essay. Flow metrics, circa 2022. Continuous improvement through inspecting and adapting is a core tenet of Agile mindsets, which dovetails well with every executive's need to deliver the most value possible. Balancing getting the most value with getting value sooner complicates the discussion. In some cases, getting some value sooner is worth more than the same value delivered later. Guiding the delivery of value is more complicated than rank ordering a list of user stories and then magically hoping that everything will happen in the most effective and efficient manner possible. Measurement is an important tool to help teams and organizations ask the right questions at the right time. Borrowing an idea from Daniel Vacante's Actionable Agile Metrics for Predictability, measurement helps people ask the right questions sooner. Flow metrics provide process transparency into organizations that leverage continuous flow, Scrumban, and/or Scrum as the basis for Agile implementations. A solid palette of flow metrics includes 1. Work in process, WIP, which is defined as the amount of work that has arrived to be worked on in a system and has not yet exited the system, regardless of whether the item is actively being worked or being delayed. 2. Story escape rate, which is defined as the number of stories that are not done deployable by the end of a sprint. Note, this is a great metric to facilitate a discussion of breaking work down and/or biting off more than a team can chew when using Scrum or Scrumban. Cycle time, which has two competing definitions. In the more typical definition, cycle time is defined as the amount of elapsed time that a work item spends as WIP. Cycle time is a direct reflection of the calendar, which is one element every customer understands. Cycle time, also called lead time or flow time, even though there might be a slight differences in those definitions, includes all of the calendar time between starting and completing. The second and perhaps more important definition of cycle time includes lead time in the question. The second and perhaps more important definition of cycle time includes lead time in the equation. This version of cycle time answers the question of how long does it take for a piece of work to be imagined and then delivered. 4. Throughput, which is a measure of the number of items that traverse the process in any given period of time. Throughput can be thought of as departure rate. How many items are completed and leave the process in a given period. 5. Flow distribution, which is the ratio of each flow item or work type flow item, if you're using Dr. McKirsten's definition of flow distribution, or work type within a system and or value stream. Note, I added this metric relatively recently after I read Project to Product and have been using it ever since. Each of these metrics can be derived as work enters and exits a system and conform to the basic requirements for measurement to be valuable: accuracy, the right level of precision, repeatability, and a shared understanding of what is being measured. How data is used and collected has affected the flow metrics palette that I consider as an entry-level form of measurement. For example, a few years ago, I included velocity in my palette of flow metrics. However, the idea of story points is so heavily abused that, except in rare cases, it's dangerous. In circumstances where productivity and estimation are important metrics, contracts and pricing, for example, I would rather grapple with the overhead of using if-bug function points than run the risk of using story points and velocity. While I sometimes use story points at a team level as a tool to control work entry, an understanding of throughput and exploding kittens generally yields better conversations and outcomes. The information gleaned from flow metrics provides input and feedback into the process of managing the flow of value. Metrics alone rarely are sufficient. We still need a mind or minds to weigh context before making decisions. The 5 flow metrics provide a powerful set of tools to generate information about the flow of value. Delivering value is the only reason Agile teams exist. Jon M Quigley, thank you for bringing your alpha and omega of product development to the Software Process and Measurement Cast.
Well, a pleasure to be here, Tom. I like chatting with you, for sure.
It just seems like 5 minutes ago we were talking.
It sort of does, doesn't it? It's amazing how time just kind of doesn't, it's irrelevant at times where it flies, goes fast so quickly.
Both of those two things are true, right? Even though we were just recording about 5 minutes ago.
I guess that's the joke.
But time does fly. It is interesting to see time, and when we're working and we're bringing work into a team or to an organization, the whole idea of time is there are multiple scales that are involved. So when an organization is dealing with differences in perception of, let's say, how long a project or a piece of work will take, or when there are configuration or architecture issues, how do they sort that out so they actually start the work that they can get done?
I was just chatting about this with some test guys, because that whole discussion ripples through the development chain. What are the most important things that and importance depends on the circumstances and probably the organization. For example, maybe we don't know the technology so well, or how we're going to apply this technology for this particular thing we're trying to do, in which case what's at risk might be our lack of knowledge in this, and those sorts of things. To gain that understanding and how to apply it are going to be more important than some other aspects or attributes. It's context dependent. If it's a marketing thing that we're not aware about which parts of this are important, then we have to kind of figure that out too, and run experiments or tests with our development group probably.
Who owns establishing that context and finding out what the context is?
Well, I think some of it are from the various teams that are going to be doing the work, because they understand how the part or the work flows through the department or through their group, their respective groups. But the other part is that outward facing component of the organization, product managers and things like that bring the outward requirements, marketing people, sales folks that bring those outward requirements into the org, and finding some way of establishing which of those are the most important. Then we have technical experts also within our org, maybe technical in that it's a specific piece of technology or something that's different than we would normally run, that we typically work with in our company. So subject matter experts like that would help us establish some of those contexts.
If every one of those people are responsible for establishing context, I'm sitting here shaking my head. How does that get pulled together? I mean, to be honest with you, that sounds like a perfect storm where everyone has a little island of context, which they might even hold as hostage to, to trade information. How does that all get sorted out?
I think that's probably I'm betting that's a pretty big failure mode right there, as in a very frequent. And it may not be malicious. It may be just coincidental because of the thinking that your little piece of the island is the context, and that's not going to always be true. I think the context, where the important context lies, depends on probably the product and organizational factors as well. For example, if it's a new set of technology, then it's probably going to be the context, the area where the new set of technologies is applied into this particular system is probably a prioritized context. If it's some external requirement, like a legal thing, then some of the external interfaces are probably going to be a significant impact into the context, or certainly qualifying those things or quantifying.
Mm-hmm. If you were doing, just for example, a piece of work that was for a truck, not a heavy truck, but let's say a medium-sized cab truck,
okay.
And it affected one of the systems that was a combination of mechanical, electrical, and software. Who would own that context? And you're being contracted to do this work.
Well, you can't do it by yourself, and you're going to have to include all of those folks, right? To get their perspective on how these contexts overlap and which is the most important for what part of the project. If it's a new thing, then you have to, whoever your architects are going to have to make sure they include the people doing the detailed level of development, systems engineering, for example. And that's a good thing. If you're a company that has a system engineering group, you're going a long way to establishing that context, because they're that bridge often between those external and the internal parts. They set the architecture in the automotive world, for example. They would set the architecture after understanding some of the external demands and understanding the operation of the system at large, including those people that own the individual components or areas that make up this system and the functions that it will be delivering.
Is that more or less complex for something that's either purely mechanical or purely software when you have all of those other parts?
It's probably a little more the layer of disaggregation, but I think rather than try to go from a very nebulous view of what's expected and try to distill that into individual components, mechanical, electrical, software, electronics, whatever that is, you have a framework based on this streamlining of the workflow and apportionment of the features throughout the architecture of the vehicle, for example, rather than here is the end feature. All you folks that are doing individual components, use your context individually to figure out how this is supposed to work. Then you get something that has been designed by multiple brains, but no cohesion to it. I remember seeing a quote. I wish I could remember who it was, and I bet you'll know. It's something that goes like this: the system should not be designed by one person, but the output design of the system should look like it was designed by one person. You ever heard that?
No, I have not heard of that, but very frankly, that resonates a ton.
Yeah. And if you don't have this funneling kind of thing, systems kind of engineering work, then you end up with a bunch of brains thinking about different aspects, and you try to kludge it together instead of somebody who's taking the very top level of this thing and distilling it down into something that's a little easier to understand, still technical, but it's a transition from customer ease into an engineering sort of language and level of importance.
It's funny, on the software side, I see that in startups to the point where you have that one grand architect that is presenting vision, and then as things mature, private equity steps in, they acquire a whole bunch of other things, so they've got a lot of things floating around. That grand unifying structure generally disappears. And then at some point, the organization looks and says, oh, we've got a boatload of architectural debt or configuration problems. They just don't match, and start to struggle to bring it back. And obviously, I don't ever know that I've run into an organization that once the genie was out of the bottle, they figured out how to put it back in wholly.
No, it's sort of like once your project is kind of behind schedule. Yeah, that's pretty much where you're at.
Oh, come on. You can just bring more people. It is always the smart thing to do to add more people to a late piece of work.
Yeah.
Always.
What is it, my friend Steve Blaze used to tell me? 9 women cannot be pregnant for a month to produce a baby. It was his favorite quote.
Okay, well, he is probably right, and I think that's by the way, my quote was in direct contradiction to Brooks's law, right? Fred Brooks proved way back in the 1960s that adding people to a late piece of work only had one natural outcome. Yeah,
worse. Makes it worse.
Yeah, makes it worse.
And the reason for that is now we have new people involved where it's all the law of diminishing returns, right? And as we bring in new people, we not only do we suffer that law of diminishing returns, some of that occurs because we have people that are experienced in what's going on here coaching new people so that their full level of participation is now diffuse.
100% agreed. But even if they were all world-class experts, just adding people increases the communication paths and therefore slows things down. I get into these passionate arguments about the idea of small teams and why small teams make a lot of sense. Obviously, it doesn't fit in every part of the world, but in general, smaller teams generally are more cohesive. They seem to be more efficient. Effective, I guess we could argue, but definitely more efficient.
It's shortening those communication lines. Those people who think that adding more people don't understand that that communication equation. If you look at that curve, that is not a linear curve.
No.
It is in fact a curve. And it's not in your it's up. It's not in your in your favor for sure.
Yeah, and I think it is a simple exponential function. So
it's simple, but it looks bad.
The bad thing about a simple one is that you can actually calculate it. You can't say it's too hard for me to know that answer.
Yes, you absolutely can calculate it, and you'll be looking at those numbers going So you're right about the small teams. You're right. You would be right about grouping more than just one discipline or domain into those teams. It comes with its own set of challenges. It's like everything else. There's pros and cons to having not just a team of developers, having testers and systems engineering in that same group. There'll be some upsides and some downsides, but for sure the communications challenges are abated.
Jon, this has been absolutely fantastic. If people wanted to continue the conversation, how would they go about doing that?
They can shoot me an email at jon.quigley@valuetransform.com. I'm on LinkedIn at Jon M Quigley, and we also have a company page at on LinkedIn at Value Transformation. You shoot a question there and we'll answer it.
Super. Thanks again, Jon. We'll have all that contact information in the show notes. Until next month. And I'll be shoveling snow, I'm pretty sure, by then.
Okay. And I'll be enjoying the North Carolina sunshine.
In Reread Saturday News, Week 5 of our reread of Agile Conversations by Douglas Squirrel and Jeffrey Fredrick tackles Chapter 4, The Fear Conversation. Fear has a significant impact on what we think and how we behave. The changes that fear drives don't stop at the individual. The behavior changes ripple through the organization. An update on last week's experiment. I was able to use some of the ideas from the trust conversation this week. I actually used this statement, the story I am telling myself is in real conversations twice. The first time, it felt contrived. It was much easier to state something as fact than to admit that it might not be true. For both conversations, I had created a conversation analysis sheet to record the conversation. I need conversation analysis practice. Also, both conversations would have gone better with a copy of the trust ladder close at hand. This week, I would like to try to generate a fear chart and have a fear conversation. I'm still considering what type of job aids will be most useful. In the next Software Process and Measurement Cast, Prabhat Singh and I talk AI. If you're a developer or entrepreneur, AI, however you define it, is in your future. You need to be ready. Mr. Singh is a serial entrepreneur who has started multiple for-profit, social enterprise, and nonprofit ventures. If process improvement is a never-ending journey, why do so many people ask, are we there yet?